The Dutch are masters at taming water. Climate change is teaching them to just let it flood. She loves the vista. She loves docking a boat just strides from her vegetable plot. She loves spotting eagles and beavers. But there is a reticence to her joy. The mixed feeling is that it was my neighbor's land, Van Lelieveld says. I'm sad because I know how sad my neighbor is. Because he was giving up his land. What used to be her neighbor's farm, walled off from the nearby river that posed a constant threat, is now pockmarked with water. It is flooded, purposefully, to soak up water when the river swells. It's not suitable for farming, but Van Lelieveld is able to live here. A simple small dike keeps her home and some others on the street dry, even if their backyards are not. This is all part of an ambitious climate project aptly called Room for the Rivers. The Dutch have battled for centuries to keep water off the land in their low-lying country, more than a quarter of which lies below sea level. While adaptation sounds like a dull word in climate talk, the Dutch have been adapting to the whims of water for a long time. Pumps, dikes and giant movable seawalls protect the country, at least half of which is threatened by floods.
Nothing about the Dutch example is perfectly replicable. Its landscape, tradition of political power sharing, and water-aware culture are unique. But there's a lot to be learned. Dutch expertise has come in handy for people running into trouble with water around the world. In the 17th century, King Charles I asked a Dutchman, Cornelius Vermeulen, to help drain the marshes in England's Cambridgeshire. When New York City was devastated by Hurricane Sandy in 2012, the US government turned to the Dutch for help. When the Ever Given ran aground in the Suez Canal, a Dutch company was contracted to get it out. But climate change means that these brute force methods that have worked for centuries won't always cut it. A dike can only be so large before it collapses under its own weight, and heightening it only increases the risk when it fails. In the 1990s, the Dutch government started to change tack, better understanding that the natural state of bodies of water exist for good reasons. One example is low-lying, uninhabited land next to rivers that could flood and help absorb water when it rains heavily upstream. That meant doing something unusual for the Dutch, knocking down some of the walls that once held back water, and moving people off the land. This is the result of climate change. To understand why the project is so vital, right now, the headwaters of the rivers that empty into the Netherlands offer an insight. Some 300 kilometers up the Rhine River from Van Lelieveld's humble house lies the Aire, a tributary that snakes through picturesque hills of West German wine country. It was here in July that floodwaters rose higher than they ever had in the collective memory of Der Nord, a small town nestled between steep slopes of vineyards. It's not easy to find words for it, says Lee Kreutzberg, 23, who on July 14th was sitting in her apartment above the winery she runs with her father. In the space of just a few hours, floodwaters spilled into the courtyard, submerged the ground floor, and rose into her apartment. Kreutzberg, her boyfriend, and 2 winery employees retreated to the building's top floor. They spent a terrifying night together, preserving phone battery to communicate with Kreutzberg's father, who was on vacation in Austria. The water finally peaked, then slowly subsided. Finally, at 5 p.m. the next day, they were rescued. In the first days, the rain made me feel very uncomfortable, Kreutzberg said, referring to the time immediately after the floods. When it started raining a bit more, the emotions came up again and I started crying, she added. When we will go back here, it will not be easy to live here without being afraid. The human impact of July's flooding was devastating. In the state of Rhineland-Palatinate alone, it killed 133 people. In total, 180 were killed in Germany and 39 in Belgium. One victim was never found. Nearly 15 centimeters of rain fell in a single 24-hour period from July 14 to 15, according to the European Organization for the Exploitation of Meteorological Satellites, causing widespread damage not only in Germany and Belgium, but also in France, Luxembourg, Switzerland and the Dutch province of Limburg. The region is no stranger to floods. But UMStat said that July's rainfall was particularly devastating and that those kinds of intense storms are becoming more likely with changing climate. To Franziska Schnitzler, standing in the ruins of her family hotel and restaurant, that connection is clear. The 350-year-old, timber frame building it once occupied was deemed unsafe and torn down. We do live with the climate change, Schnitzler says. And this is the result. And for young and old alike, climate change is intersecting with a crisis of mental health. In the days after the floods, 3 people in Durnal took their own lives. It was the grandma of one of my best friends, Schnitzel says. One night she woke me up and she said, "My grandma, my grandma, my grandma." That was so hard, to lose someone after the flood. A wake-up call for the Netherlands. The people who have given up their homes and land in the Netherlands did it not primarily for themselves, but for others. They were asked to sacrifice to protect people in cities up and down river, for whom floods pose a much more acute threat. It was major flooding from rivers in 1993 and 1995 that served as a wake-up call, says Hans Brouwer, who for years has managed projects for the Dutch government's Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. "We focused for decades on the sea, and defending us from storm surges," he recalls. "And then we were surprised by our rivers. And in 95 the decision was made to evacuate 250,000 people. So that really made an impression." Those floods coincided with some of the first reports from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change ringing the climate alarm bells. "We realized that we can expect even more water from the rivers, and at the same time it would be difficult to get rid of that water because of sea level rise," Brouwer said. Some 15 years ago, Brouwer's colleagues came to Noel Majors, a dairy farmer, and told him that the die-shaped spit of land that he and 17 other families called home would soon need to be turned into a floodplain. "We had been through 93 and 95. So we did think that something would have to be done at some point. What that was, we didn't know," Majors, now 72, said. Then when the government came and said that this area might be used as a floodplain, that was of course a huge shock. "We had been convinced that we could stay here and farm for generations."
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe